This is a comparison of 3 large aperture micro four thirds lenses. By large aperture in this case means larger than f2. Micro four thirds cameras have smaller sensor size than full frame cameras. That makes the focal length appear to be double compared to full frame lenses. The image magnification of a 50mm lens for a micro four thirds camera corresponds to a 100mm lens for a full frame camera. Some of the lenses in this comparison are available for other standards as well. If the same lens is used for larger sensors, the image quality in terms of sharpness will be better. This comparison is for micro four thirds cameras. The common denominator for these lenses is large maximum aperture and the budget price. It is not a completely fair comparison since the focal length differ between them. That is to the advantage for the lens with the longest focal length when comparing sharpness, since the other images have to be cropped and magnified. This comparison is not mainly a comparison of specification and numbers. It is rather a side-by-side comparison by visual inspection. It includes subjective characteristics such as look and feel, but the main focus is of course on the image quality and what the lens can do. Finally, I will make a ranking of the performance of the lenses in relation to the market price. One reason why I wanted to have a closer look at these lenses was to make a judgment how useful the larger apertures are for the KamLan 50mm f1.1 and the Samyang 85mm f1.4 lens. Consumers who read the specification about maximum aperture may assume that the image quality is equal for all apertures, but a lens with a smaller maximum aperture may actually be a better choice than a lens with a larger aperture if the image quality is unacceptable for the largest aperture setting. Specifications are usually just numbers, and there is no indication how the image quality varies for different aperture settings. The largest aperture may have some limitations, making it less useful for certain situations due to soft focus, flare or chromatic aberration. As with all products, they can look better in the specification than what they are in actual use. It is also good to know if one lens has better specifications than another. Is that correctly reflected in the price difference? Is it a bargain or is it overpriced? In my opinion, it's hard to find budget lenses that doesn't have a point of weakness, but there are a few. The ones that has some limitation may still be useful for certain types of photography, depending on the photographer's priorities. Which limitation is acceptable is for each user to decide. A few words about the lenses and the manufacturers. Olympus is one of the major camera and lens manufacturers in Japan. The company is based in Tokyo and was founded just over 100 years ago in 1919. It is a big company producing all kinds of optics. It is, among other things, a major supplier for the medical optics market. Olympus produces other optical products as well. For instance, I have a pair of Olympus binoculars. Olympus has been manufacturing lenses and cameras for a long time and has a good reputation. During the 35mm film era, I was mostly aware of the system cameras from Canon, Nikon and Minolta, so I wasn't following what was going on in the Olympus product line. But when reading about it now, I realized that crop frame cameras is not new to Olympus. The idea was already introduced with the Olympus Pen series, which was first released in 1959. Those cameras had half-frame format, which produced 24x 18mm images on a 35mm film cassette, enabling up to 72 frames on one film roll, which is twice the number of full-frame images. The history of film cameras in general is interesting. I will give you a quick flashback of it. When looking at today's cameras, it's easy to forget how difficult photography used to be before the digital cameras took over the market. For instance, when a film roll was loaded, the ISO value was fixed, but enthusiasts learned how to wind the film back from the middle of the roll, leaving just a strip outside the cassette to be able to reattach the film later. And when doing so, they had to remember the frame number where they have stopped and take that number of shots with the lens cap on down in order to return to the right position in the film roll. Back then, many photographers spent long hours in the red light inside dark rooms, seeing images magically appear on paper as a chemical process, hanging them to dry with clips. That is a different craft compared to all the degrees of freedom of digital cameras, not to mention the possibilities in post-processing software. Recently, there has been a revival of the film cameras among enthusiasts, a bit similar to the strong comeback of the vinyl gramophone records. But I can't help just feeling grateful for the possibilities of today's technology, which of course in a couple of decades will be considered Stone Age. Nothing ages faster than technology, but the lifetime of it can be surprisingly long. Let's return to more recent events. In 2008, Olympus created the Micro Four Thirds standard for mirrorless cameras in cooperation with Panasonic. The standard has a crop factor 2. In other words, for a certain focal length, the magnification of the image will be double compared to a full-frame camera. In general, what can be said about manufacturing in Japan is that the quality management is usually excellent. I assume that is also valid for products produced abroad by Japanese companies. One such product is the Olympus 45mm f1.8, which is made in Vietnam. I haven't followed the recent development in lens production. Although lens parts are increasingly produced with automation, I think there is still manual work involved in lens assembly, such as alignment and inspection of optical elements. Initially, I thought that lower production cost outside Japan might be one reason for this lens having such an attractive price. But then I found that my other, twice as expensive prime lens was also produced in Vietnam, so that doesn't seem to be the case. Enough said about lens production. Let's have a look at the Olympus 45mm f1.8 used in the lens comparison. When looking at the specifications, it appears the Olympus 45mm f1.8 lens has no weakness. It supports automation, transfers EXIF data to the camera, and it is the smallest and lightest of the three lenses. From appearance, it has a bit odd shape with a very small front lens element, and it is made mostly of plastic material. Some people may consider plastic cheap and inferior in quality to metal, but I think that might be a misunderstanding. While shooting the photos for this video, I actually got to know how good the plastic material is. I was in a bit of a hurry when I switched lenses, and the Olympus 45mm lens fell out of my camera bag from about 0.4 meter down to a stone floor. The plastic material, mainly the lens hood, seemed to protect the lens by being elastic and dampening the impact. I continued shooting with that lens and it worked flawlessly with no problems. If the lens had been made of metal, it probably would have been broken. The plastic may feel cheap, but it makes the lens light and possibly less sensitive to shock. I don't recommend you do that shock test. You may not be as lucky as I was. This lens, in my opinion, does not have the best look and feel, but it is a very sharp lens with high image quality at all apertures. When comparing the specification of the other lenses, it appears to have high specification across the table, but at the same time it doesn't stick out when it comes to maximum aperture or near focus distance. This lens has no weakness, and if I were to buy only one of these lenses, it would be this one. I have made a review of this lens in a separate video. Please have a look at it in my playlist for photography if you're interested to know more about it. Samyang is a South Korean manufacturer of lenses for a number of standards. It's a relatively new company founded in 1972. The lenses are sold under a number of different brand names, for instance Rockinon. My impression is that the lenses are often designed for full-frame cameras and then adapted to various crop sensor standards. That may be the reason why the lenses tend to be a bit big and chunky, especially compared to the native Micro Four Thirds lenses. It is also a reason why many of the lenses are manual, although recently I've also seen lenses with autofocus support. This Samyang 85mm lens is quite big, and it becomes bigger than the full-frame version, since the adapter to Micro Four Thirds cameras need to shorten the flange distance by using a long adapter. I don't like the weight of it, but I have come to appreciate the size, since it's easy to carry around when the front heavy lens falls down in a vertical position, a bit similar to the way binoculars are hanging around the neck. I find smaller lenses harder to carry around, since those are in the horizontal position, sticking out more. Apart from the form factor issue, The mechanics is very smooth and it has a solid quality feel. It is a joy to focus manually with this lens. One common problem when adapting a full-frame lens to a Micro Four Thirds camera is that the image sharpness may be lower since the crop sensor magnifies the image, which includes blurred pixels which may not be visible in the full-frame format. This lens looks really good too, with a large front element giving the impression of being a very bright lens. If you want a more detailed review of this lens, please have a look in the playlist for photography, where I have made a separate review of this lens. Regarding the KamLan 50mm f1.1 Mark II, the lens is funded on Kickstarter, and according to the information available there, the manufacturer is Samyang Optics, founded in 2015 in the Shenzhen province in China, and KamLan is a brand for large aperture lenses. These lenses are sold via the Taiwanese distributor Sonic, founded in 2011. In other words, this is a very new company which is developing and producing large aperture lenses using crowdfunding. The KamLan 50mm f1.1 Mark II is an upgrade from the first version of this lens. It is available for APS-C sensors as well as Micro Four Thirds cameras. In this lens comparison, I will not look at the aperture settings larger than f1.4 to be able to compare it to the Samyang lens. All lenses are compared for aperture setting 2.0 and smaller. This lens is designed for mirrorless cameras and is therefore a bit more compact than the Samyang lens. It is mostly made of metal, making it slightly heavy, and the aperture ring is clickless and continuous, with nice resistance. The focus ring is also very comfortable to use and has a quality feel to it. The lens hood is made of metal and the plastic lens caps has the KamLan logo on it, which makes it look nice. In other words, it's slightly big and heavy for being a Micro Four Thirds lens, but not by much. It has a quality feel and it's nice to use. This lens has both strength and weakness, and the strength is the f1.1 exceptionally large aperture. It is not just a specification item, it is actually quite sharp at the largest aperture, although there is some chromatic aberration. I have made a more detailed review of this lens in an earlier video. If you want to know more about the performance of this lens, please have a look in my playlist for photography. Some information about the test. The comparison will be in 3 images: landscape, medium distance and close-up distance. The camera was set to aperture priority. Each photo is shot with various aperture settings for each lens. Manual focusing was performed by magnifying a small rectangle 14 times in the viewfinder and setting the focus on a detail. For the Olympus lens, the autofocus function was used. The images are compared side by side in pairs. First, the KamLan and the Samyang lenses are compared, since they have one aperture stop more than the Olympus lens. Then the KamLan lens is compared to the Olympus lens, since those two lenses have almost the same focal length. After each of the 3 image types are compared, I summarize my opinion about the performance of the lenses. The first image is a landscape with a power line. Comparison between the KamLan 50mm f1.1 and the Samyang 85mm f1.4. The 50mm KamLan image is cropped and enlarged to get the same image size as the 85mm Samyang image. When looking at the f1.4 images, it initially appears the KamLan lens is sharper than the Samyang lens. But when taking a closer look, it can be seen that the reason for that is mainly due to higher contrast in the KamLan image. Actually, the Samyang lens seems just slightly sharper than the cropped KamLan lens image at f1.4 and f2.0. That actually means that the KamLan lens is very sharp if the image was not cropped. From f2.8, the Samyang lens remains a bit sharper with about the same contrast as the KamLan lens. That is when looking at the image on a 27-inch screen, and it is not a big difference. I would say the sharpness of the images are almost the same, while the contrast seems better for the KamLan lens for apertures larger than f2.8, which makes the image look clearer. The color rendering differs between the lenses. The Samyang lens has a slightly yellow-green tint, while the KamLan is more of a blue color to it. I think the Samyang color rendering is more pleasing and actually makes the images look good straight out of the camera. The color rendering of the KamLan lens is good but not outstanding. Of course, coloring can be modified in post-processing. KamLan 50mm f1.1 Mark II versus Olympus 45mm f1.8. The Olympus lens is slightly sharper for apertures f2.0 and f2.8, but they are about equally sharp for smaller apertures. In this comparison, it appears that the Olympus has also slightly higher contrast than the KamLan lens. There is a difference in brightness, which may be caused by the aperture priority setting of the camera. The Olympus lens color rendering has a bit more purple tint, while the KamLan lens has a slight blue tone. Both these lenses produce very sharp images. The Olympus lens has good contrast and sharpness, but it doesn't have as large maximum aperture as the other lenses, the largest aperture being f1.8. The image too is a close-up image. Comparison between the KamLan 50mm f1.1 Mark II and the Samyang 85mm f1.4. At the closest focus distance, the KamLan lens is much sharper than the Samyang lens for f1.4 and f2.0. Then from f2.8 they are about equally sharp. But as in the landscape image, the KamLan appears to have more contrast in the images. Comparison between the Olympus 45mm f1.8 and the KamLan 50mm f1.1. The Olympus lens has more contrast, while the KamLan is just a little sharper at close focus distance. These small differences in sharpness are so small. Those are on the error margin of the autofocus system or the manual focus setting. I think the manual focusing using the 14 times magnification is quite accurate. The images look very sharp for both lenses and the results are nearly equal. Image 3, medium distance. Comparison between the KamLan 50mm f1.1 Mark II and the Samyang 85mm f1.4. The KamLan lens is sharper at f1.4 and f2.0. From f2.8 the Samyang lens is sharp. The color rendering is as before. The KamLan lens has slightly blue tint while the Samyang appear slightly yellow-green. Olympus 45mm f1.8 compared to the KamLan 50mm f1.1 Mark II. The Olympus lens may be a little sharper, but hardly any difference. It has more of the purple tint, while the KamLan is more to the blue. The contrast in this image is about equal between the two lenses. These two lenses are very sharp and have good image quality. The sharpness is about equal for the Olympus and the KamLan lens. Samyang in comparison seems less sharp for f1.4 and f2. From f2.8 and on, the Samyang lens is very sharp. The KamLan 50mm lens can take images with at least the same sharpness as the Samyang lens and perhaps more contrast, even if the image is cropped to the same magnification as the 85mm lens. At the same time, the price for the KamLan lens is about $100 lower than the Samyang lens, while it also enables the use of even larger apertures up to f1.1, so it offers at least the same image quality as well as more useful features for less money. If I were to choose between these two lenses, I would choose the KamLan lens, although there are a few situations where the Samyang lens is actually better, mainly against light sources where flare occurs. It is also worth mentioning that I find the color rendering nicer for the Samyang lens. But there are also other issues with the Samyang lens, which is the larger size and the heavier weight of it. Personally, I find the weight to be the most negative issue. The size matters less because, as I mentioned earlier, it is front heavy and it falls to a vertical position when carried with a strap around the neck. Another negative for the Samyang lens is the steps of the aperture ring. It starts at f1.4 and the next step is f2.0. I find the f1.4 aperture hard to use due to chromatic aberration and low contrast. I would appreciate if there was one aperture stop between f1.4 and f2.0. The KamLan lens, on the other hand, has a clickless continuous aperture ring that starts at f1.1 and can be stopped down to any position up to f16. The 50mm focal length feels useful in more situations than the 85mm focal length. These two correspond to 100mm and 170mm focal length for a full frame camera. All taken together, the KamLan lens offers more functionality, high sharpness and contrast in a smaller form factor for about 30% lower price. If you look at the KamLan lens in comparison with the Olympus lens, the following conclusions can be made. If the KamLan lens didn't have the f1.1 aperture, then this would be a very easy choice, since the Olympus lens has better specification in almost every way. For instance, it has at least the same sharpness, autofocus support, aperture control from the camera, EXIF data communicated to the camera, very small form factor and very lightweight, very little chromatic aberration, as well as controlled flare. These two lenses come with about the same price tag, which is about $200 US. So if I were to pick one lens, it would be the Olympus lens. However, if you really want the large aperture, much larger than f1.8, for low light or to create object isolation from the blurred out background, then there's probably no other lens near this price level that can deliver the specification of the KamLan lens. And if the KamLan lens is chosen, it comes with some weakness when it comes to flare, especially when there are light sources against a dark background. In those situations, it is best to stop down to f2.8 or at least f2.0, otherwise the result may disappoint. I shot a city night panorama with f1.1 and the resulting images did not have acceptable quality. There was flare around the light sources. Car headlights in the evening may also have circular halo around them in some situations. If you're prepared to avoid these situations with flare and you really want the f1.1 aperture, then the KamLan lens is probably the best offer at this price level. On the other hand, if f1.8 is enough, then the Olympus is the obvious choice, since it doesn't have any weakness in the image quality or in the specifications. It is up to each photographer to decide what trade-off is acceptable. I would say if you only want to buy one of these lenses, then the Olympus lens is the best value for the money. The Samyang is unique because of the combination of long focal length and large aperture, but by cropping images from the KamLan or Olympus lenses, images with the same sharpness and magnification can be achieved, although with a slightly less number of pixels, which the eye cannot resolve anyway. I would rank them in the order Olympus first, KamLan second and Samyang third. All of these lenses are nice, I like them very much, but they are not really on the same level. I hope this was useful information for you. If you found this video interesting, please like and subscribe. If you're interested in photo equipment, also check out my playlist for photography. I will make more reviews of cameras, lenses and photo equipment soon. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.